Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred, and today we're going to continue in Martha Sweezy's wonderful book, Internal Family Systems for Shame and Guilt. And in today's example, we are now talking about exiles and working with exiles, which is really exciting. And today is Martha's client named Elion, and his exile shows up in the form of a worm. This is really interesting to note because sometimes our exiles will show up as younger versions of us as children, sometimes huddled up or sometimes numb and catatonic. They might appear dead. They might be dirty, disformed, all kinds of things like that. But a lot of times exiles will show up in symbols, and exiles will often actually show up in our dreams too, because they've been pushed down by other parts that are kind of more in our, rational, intellectual parts of our brain. And so they're pushed into our subconscious. They're exiled there. And so they try to come up and communicate with us in symbols, maybe in emotional or physical pain or some kind of energy like that. So often you'll see them come up kind of in symbolic ways. So I will read this example to you. Elion was a 32-year-old cisgender heterosexual immigrant from Kosovo. He came to the United States with his family as a child and had some permanent hearing loss from the war. By the time of this interaction, he had gotten permission to help an exile who had a profound startle response that made other parts angry because it kept him up at night. Okay, so I just want to point out here that, especially in these examples with exiles, it means there's been prior work, right? Working with the protectors around this exile, befriending them, getting to know them, gaining trust between, in this case, Elion's self and these protective parts to get permission to go toward the exile. And a lot of times exiles are feared in the system. Like, it sounds like this one gives him a startled response. Like, I have a couple exiles that show up in panic or collapse, and they really take over my body. And a lot of other parts are very afraid of them coming up because it feels very out of control or disruptive to my daily life. It sounds like this one is disruptive to Elion's sleep. So it's understandable why these other parts don't like it, want it to stay hidden. But they don't understand that there is a way for this part to actually be healed in connection with Elion's self. So we first have to befriend them and give them that hope, let them experiment with it, so that they can let the exile come up. Okay. So Elion says, I see a long thing under the bed, my bed as a child, and it's saying something garbled. So Martha says, does it see you, Elion? She's checking for self energy here to see if the exile sees him. Elion says, I'm not sure. And Martha says, how do you feel toward it? So this is another way to check for self energy. Elion says, repulsed but curious. So there may be a little bit of a part there and the self. So Martha says, ask the part or parts who feel repulsed to let you handle this. And Elion nods. Martha says, is it okay with them? And Elion nods again. And she says, ask if anyone can translate the garbled message. Elion says, I'm getting, it's hard to be a worm. And then he becomes tearful. Martha says after a pause, does the worm want your help? Elion says, I can't touch it. Martha says, because, right? Because, again, just curiosity. Will it not let you touch it? Is there something blocking you? Elion says, it doesn't want to be touched. And then, the self will always respect the boundaries that a part has. So Martha says, what does it want? Elion says, it wants me to sit on the floor nearby. So Martha says, do that. And if it's stuck in the past, you can help. Elion says, it's death. Yeah, that makes sense with his past injury. So Martha says, is it from the explosions? And Elion nods. She says, what needs to happen? So at this point, usually by the time a person is interacting with an exile, the practitioner will continue to make sure that they're in self. But usually by that time, they are in self because you've done quite a bit of work with protectors and getting the person to be in self in relationship to the exile. So she's just saying what needs to happen. She's really just passing the baton to Elion's self. And Elion says, I am moving the house to a mountaintop in Montenegro where it is quiet. He wants his family to be in the house too, and they are. So again, he is really directing what's going on inside because he is in self. So he understands what this part needs in order to reparent or redo the situation. He wants the house to be moved, and in the inner world, you can do anything. So he can do that. And then he's addressing a concern, right? It sounds like the worm is saying that they want the family to be there. So the self is making sure that happens. And Martha says, good, stay with him. And then Elion is inside for a long time. There's a long silence. And he says he felt like a worm. So again, this exile is showing up as a worm to give Elion really valuable information, because all any part wants is for the self to really get it, to really get their experience, to really understand. They want to be seen and heard and understood and valued. And so whenever they show up in a certain form or they show you anything, everything is important. They're showing you something very valuable they want you to get. So Martha says again, does he see you? And Elion nods and says, how does he respond? And Elion gets tearful again and says, he says, where were you? And after a long pause, Martha says, what do you say? Elion says, I'm sorry. This is actually a very common response that self will give, because self will understand and have compassion, like it looks like Elion has, on the part having felt alone and saying, where were you? I was so alone. And he'll say, I'm so sorry. And then Martha says, what does he need from you now? And Elion says, before the war, we went to the hot springs in the mountains. He wants to be there. Again, this process really, once the protective parts are resting back and the person's self is in leadership, the process goes so fluidly and naturally, right? So he's naturally meeting their concerns, naturally reparenting, and now naturally retrieving, right? Bringing this worm part to a safe space in these hot springs. So Martha says, does he feel that you understand what happened to him? Because that's really the most important thing, is that the self really gets it. And after a pause, Elion nods. And Martha says, does he have burdens from that time? Elion nods. And Martha says, is he ready to let them go? And then Elion says, his body shakes, his head hurts, he can't move, which is really kind of a byproduct of the shock, right, in his system, that shaking and freezing response. And Elion says, what does it mean to let that go? And Martha says, what would help him, Elion? Elion says, I'm putting him in the hot springs and I'm getting in with him so he's not alone. And the therapist, Martha says, what does he feel? Elion says, hopeless. Okay, so he has these effects on his body, on his nervous system from the trauma. but then he also has an emotional burden of hopelessness. So Martha says, what is it like for him to have you there? Elion says, he likes it. And Martha says, what does he need from you? Elion says, understanding. He wants me to stay. And Martha says, is that okay with you? Elion says, yes, I will stay. And after another pause, Martha says, how is his body? And Elion says, he's starting to move in the water. So one of his burdens was this kind of frozen state. So now he's starting to kind of relax, it looks like, and be able to move. So Martha says, if he's interested, we could try a little experiment to make him more comfortable. Always getting permission. And Elion nods. Martha says, it's up to him, but he could put the hopelessness and all of this shock in his nervous system into a storage until he's ready to let it go if he wants. So it seemed like, I guess, she's getting the idea that he's not ready to let it go. So she's proposing an experiment. What if you just put it in some kind of storage? And you can do this in the inner world, visually or spatially, or just, have a knowing that they're putting it in some kind of container, and putting it aside so that they don't have to carry it. Sometimes parts are afraid to get rid of it. They have fears that they'll be in danger if they get rid of it. They won't be loyal to other people who had the experience. They have lots of concerns. So you can do this experiment. What if you put it in this container and you just felt what it felt like for you to not have to carry it? And if you want, you can get it back out and take it back. Because if they do get rid of it before they or the protective parts are ready, there will be backlash, right? So there's no rush, there's no pressure until they feel like it's safe. So Martha says, by now I guessed that this percussed, petrified boy would unburden gradually. But we could promote his healing by putting his burdens of fear, autonomic collapse, and the sense of worthlessness out of his body and into storage. So Elion says he is willing to try that. That's all we ever need, is a willingness. And Martha says, have him choose a container that closes and is big enough to hold everything. And Elion nods. He can put it all in. Elion nods again. How does that feel? Elion says, better. Martha says, what will he need going forward? So putting the burden, she puts a note here that putting the burdens in storage allows the part to take in what he needs without delay. So again, sometimes it just feels more comfortable to the part to not get rid of the burden permanently, but to just experiment with it being not on them. But once it's not, they're not carrying it, they can invite in what they need. Just like Martha said. So Elion says he needs quiet and calm. So Martha says, can he invite that in? And pauses and says, how does it feel? Elion says, good. And Martha says, so Elion, will you be able to check with him this week? Think carefully. It is best to be completely honest. If you're busy or other parts will interfere, we'll ask him to be patient in this safe place until we come back next week. This is really good what Martha's doing here, because sometimes there are very well-meaning parts that really want to be able to check in midweek, but other parts will block the way for whatever reason. And so it's actually really helpful to work with the parts who block the way. I call them the resistors, and get to know them and why they do that and what their concerns are. Because if their concerns are met, sometimes their concern is it's going to take too long, it's going to be too overwhelming. Sometimes their concern is I want freedom, I don't want to have to do this. And so we can meet those concerns, right? We'll just meet with them for 20 seconds and we can set a timer and I'll check in with you and say, is it okay? You have the freedom to say yes or no. Is it okay to meet with them? So you can meet the concerns of those resistors But if you don't have time to do that kind of work, and you're a practitioner working with a client, you can say, ask him if he can be patient, till we meet next week, and we'll come back with him. But you want to be honest, because it really destroys trust, right? To promise to come to them and then not. So Elion says, yes, true. I would like to say yes, but I don't know. So Martha says, that is fine. Let him know that you don't have a consensus yet, right? The parts are not agreeing on it yet inside, about being available to him outside of therapy. Would he like to stay at the hot spring or in the cabin in the mountains? Elion says, at the hot spring. So you want to leave the part in a safe space. Sometimes you can assign kind of a caretaking part to be with them, and until the next session. But it is really helpful to work with the parts who block, whatever blocks the way is the way. Work with the parts who block that midweek checking in, because ultimately it really is the secure attachment and connection with the client, with the person's self, and that part that's going to heal the whole system. So it's really not a detour to work with whatever blocks the way. That will then lead to the connection that allows for healing. Okay, so the part wants to be at the hot spring, and Martha says he can also leave those burdens in storage for the week if he wants to, but it's up to him. So Martha makes a final note that some exiles are ready to let burdens go in one session, but others need more time. There's no right or wrong. You're just going with whatever they need. If they need more time, we can move burdens out of the body to storage for the time being. If the part is willing to use storage, it's likely to feel some immediate relief. It may leave its burdens in storage till the next session, or it may take them out. Because this is unpredictable, I say in advance that whatever happens is fine. The important thing is to notice the experiment. Yes, yes, yes. You cannot get it wrong. And you're always proposing an experiment, and you're always respecting the response of the part. So if this worm part had said, no, I need to take the burdens back until next time, you would respect that, right? Or you might ask, what are you afraid would happen if you left them? Or know that you have the capability to put them in storage if and when you want to. But every part has their own autonomy, and the self is never, ever disrespectful of that, is never steamrolling over a part. All right. So I love these examples because it's really wonderful to have just a straightforward IFS session. Once you get to the exile, witness, reparent, redo, retrieve, unburden, integrate, and it just happens smoothly. Sometimes that happens, but other times there's all kinds of things that can happen. It's kind of a choose your own adventure, right? You're not in charge. You don't have the agenda as the facilitator or even as the self. You follow the needs and concerns of the parts, and just are present and flowing with whatever happens. And it really is quite an enjoyable experience when we're self-led. Okay, I hope you appreciated that example. It was a good one, in my opinion. If you have any questions or any comments, please leave them in the comment section below.